podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to Away the Podcast. It's Martin here, and we've got an edition of Roker Rewind for you today because as the summer transfer market gets into full swing, we thought we'd take a look back at some of those players who were heavily linked with Sunderland at the time, but did not end up wearing the red and white shirts. And joining me in this quest to find these players that we missed out on and relive some times that we never actually got to experience, I've got a couple of people here who are very definitely Sunderland staples with consistent members of the Away the Podcast team. First of all, we've got Chris Wynn. Morning, Chris.
Yes, good morning, mates. Definitely looking forward to getting into this one because there's definitely a list of names over the years that have nearly joined Sunderland. And I think on Roker Rewind and on this week and all of those pods, I think we've mentioned, I think if we went back through those and just, kept jotting down every time a player's name was mentioned that didn't join us, we'd have a pretty hefty list. So it'll be good to get into some individual ones in this pod, I think.
It will, won't it? And, there's so many names get linked these days, but, back in the day, there wasn't as many, was there? And you could read the back of the Echo and read the stories linking players, and some were closer than others, but, some of the famous ones, and this obviously came up in the last week or two, wasn't it, with obviously Kevin Keegan passing, but there was a story about him almost joining Sunderland when Alan Brown was in charge, I think, and Ray Kennedy almost joined Sunderland. Jackie Milburn played a couple of games on trial and never, well, he played during the war, didn't he? He had trial at Sunderland, never got taken up, and he obviously went and scored a goal or two somewhere else. Can't quite remember where. Mo Salah apparently nearly joined the club, but is the one that stands out to you when you look back through all of the transfer speculation you remember as one that you really wish had joined us?
Well, I'll start off by just throwing one word back at you because you were saying that there's more sources and everything now. Club call. I'll throw club call back at you.
0898 12 11 50.
Yeah.
12 11 40.
And then getting another bollocking when the phone bill came in. Because I remember on there in Roker Park, Sunderland were linked with Roberto Baggio in that summer when we got promoted to the Premier League. Ariel Ortega was linked. I remember that summer in '96 when Karol Poborski did his scoop. We were linked with him pretty much the day after. So I remember on Club Call thinking we were going to sign everyone. And in the end, we got Quinny. So I mean, I think Quinny turned out better than all that. But I'll give you two. I want to give you three, but I'll give you two just for the save some time.
As long as you don't say you want to give us one, that's fine.
Right, I'll definitely give you two. And I'll give chronological order. I'll go back because when we spoke to Dennis Smith, it was actually the first time I'd heard anywhere that he said just before he was sacked, he was going to bring in Andy Cole. And apparently because he went on to Bristol City and then brought in Andy Cole then. So it was a strange thing because he'd obviously brought in John Byrne, he brought in Don Goodman, and he wanted to bring in the young Andy Cole on loan from Arsenal. And he said he had it all lined up and set up to go, and then he was given the boot. So it would have been interesting to see us in the second half of that season if we'd had those three strikers, because obviously he went on to do really well at Bristol City. The other one, which I've said for years and years, I think was something that could have maybe extended the Peter Reidy era. When we were just about to finish 17th in the season before he got sacked, in the March of that season, Peter Crouch left Portsmouth and signed for Aston Villa. Now, we were linked with him quite a lot before he went to Aston Villa. And I think if Peter Crouch had signed for us then as a replacement for Niall Quinn, and Peter Reid was able to carry on playing with the style we were playing with those big diagonal balls, Kevin Phillips still playing off a player like Quinn in Peter Crouch, you just wonder, would he, I mean, there was a lot of other stuff maybe going wrong at the time and probably wishful thinking, but you just wonder, would he have been able to reset the year after and go again with a big man, little man up front, rather than the season we had where he ended up getting sacked in the October and Howard Wilkinson, Mick McCarthy, all of that sort of stuff. But yeah, sliding doors moment, you just wonder. And, of course, Aston Villa are a big club, but that we were linked with them for quite some time before he went to Aston Villa. And I think he went for, I'm going from memory now, but I'm sure it was like 4 million or something like that. And you just wonder whether Peter Reid didn't want to go in with that amount of money at that point.
Now, it's funny when you mentioned Peter Crouch going to Villa, because I remember I was living in a shared house in Leeds with some of my mates at the time. And I was always a massive fan of Crouch. I just liked him as a player. And I think it's because I thought he would fit in with Sunderland. You could see him how he would link up with Phillips and, potentially be a replacement for Niall Quinn. And I had a bet, and it must have involved beer. I had a bet about how many goals Crouch would score for Aston Villa. And I think it was either over 8 or over 10. And my mate who I was sharing a house with, who was a mag, who obviously thought himself as a better class of football connoisseur than I was at the time, he said, no, Crouch is shit. He'll never score that many goals. So I made a chart, and it was up above the TV with I put a picture of Crouchy on there. I was marking goals off, and needless to say, I was vindicated and correct and had some beer at the end of the season. But there you go. Also joining us today is Andrew Smithson. And Andrew, Chris has rattled off a few names there who almost joined us. But what sticks out for you?
What sticks out to me is the fact you had time to put a chart up on the wall. I'd love to be able to do that nowadays and prove, when you get in a petty argument and, you go too far to prove your point. I do not have the time to be printing off charts and wall planners and all of that for my...
You see, Andrew, this is where me and you differ, because there's always enough time to prove yourself correct in a petty argument.
Listen to James O'Brien there.
Funnily enough, you're talking about James O'Brien there. We like to give little peeks behind the curtain. We're testing a new recording format, aren't we? And when you two lads were talking there about club call, I thought you should have ran the number along the bottom. Ring club call now. Strike a set the sign for Roker, ? Or something. I also thought it was quite apt that for a Roker Rewind episode, when we were first working through our settings, our microphones sounded like we were a commentator live from behind the Iron Curtain or something, when you hear crackly archive footage of a commentator and they're speaking down the phone line. Right, yes, you asked me a question. Sorry, Martin. This one, I don't know if this would count, but I think the fact that we'd actually seen Shay Given on loan and knew what he was capable of meant that then when Reid tried to sign him, very good, Martin. Martin's just quickly broke some amazing news there, and if that was true, that would be a Roker Rewind episode. It
would be an exclusive, wouldn't it? Vinny Jr. arrives. Call 0898 12 11 40. Only £50 a minute. It's a bargain for half the price.
We'll tell you all about it.
Would need it at £50 an hour to pay for his wages. Shay Given, once he'd gone back on loan, there was a long protracted summer where we were trying to bring him in permanently. It never happened. And because we knew how good he was, that felt even more galling. Because if you miss out on a player and you never get to see them playing for your team, you can kid yourself, oh, well, they were crap. It was never going to work out anyway. But we knew that Shay Given was a real deal. And a more recent one, just last summer, we were heavily linked with Armand Loriente, and I still don't think we've actually signed a first choice right winger. I mean, we did all right when we didn't sign him. We finished 7th, and I don't know if people know this, but we qualified for Europe. So we scraped by without him. But that was a player who when you see the clips, I was more excited about and thought could have done a job. But then again, there's a difference now. You used to read about a player in the Echo, and for a start, there must have been some substance to it, because the Echo wouldn't just print stories for attention. The Echo wasn't ran by a bunch of Walter Mickeys that like to say, "Oh, I've just seen somebody pull up at the petrol station on the A690 and his number plate is, don't know, Mr. Messi 1 or whatever." So if it was in a proper paper, you could half believe it. But you couldn't then do anything with that information. Whereas now, when Sunderland are linked with anybody, what's the first thing you do? You go on YouTube and you look at the highlights reel.
Yeah.
So,
well, it was always back in the day. It was always people staying at the Ramside, wasn't it?
yes, yeah.
And people who worked there were sticking links. But I'm just going to say it to you two, because we're a little bit telepathic at times on Roker Rewind. I'm going to say to you, tell me the two names I'm thinking of in terms of being constantly linked with Sunderland.
Martin Ling, John Frayne.
Martin Ling and John Frayne. Absolutely. Funny, because I did an On This Day the other week, and that was the back page of the Echo where Martin Ling was going to sign. I didn't realise at the time, actually, he was wanted by quite a lot of clubs and Premier League clubs and everything, because he was a free agent, and I hadn't realised that. And in the end, stayed at Swindon after. And it was when Swindon got promoted, he was thinking about going to a different club, clearly, for more money. But the other one as well, I have to crowbar in, and I do apologise for time and all that. But can you believe it, lads? I did an On This Day the other week that Andy Melville wasn't our first choice centre-half choice signing that summer with Terry Butcher. Can you believe that?
Well, he was our first choice, Chris, and that's all that matters.
He's always my first choice. But it was actually the one that I wanted to go for, because when Ian Atkins came in to be Terry Butcher's number 2, he came from Cambridge. He'd spent the last 6 months before that at Cambridge, and he was desperate for Terry Butcher to bring in Liam Daish.
Yeah. He was a good player.
He was a very good player and did really well. And then he was obviously involved with Quinny getting injured, if you remember. He was shouting at Quinny, saying he'd feigned it and stuff like that when he'd properly done his knee at Roker Park against Coventry. But yeah, apparently Ian Atkins was desperate for us to go for Liam Daish, and in the end, we got Melvin. So it all turned out great.
I wonder what the odds are then of Liam Daish becoming Sunderland's manager and winning the FA Cup, because the last person to stand over a Sunderland striker and accuse him of feigning a knee injury did just that, didn't they?
Yeah. So I don't know how he's doing in the coaching world, but if that's his path, then he's going to do all right.
Be long odds, I suspect.
When you were talking there about being telepathic, I thought the question was going to be who had stayed at the Ramside or CM Hall the longest, because every summer, I mean, the staff at these hotels had the loosest lips going, but they would always be telling you, "Oh yes, Robbie Keane stayed. He spent last night in the spa, and then he's ordered eggs Benedict for his breakfast and all of this." I thought you were going to ask who had the longest residency at CM Hall. I would have said Jan Collar for that one.
Well, Robbie Keane was an easy one because we weren't one of his 10 boyhood clubs, were we? So he was never going to sign for Sunderland. The other one, quickly, when you said about Shea Given not signing for us, Chris Waddle, first time around.
Of course.
That we missed out on.
Big one. And it's interesting, some of these ones that we're going to delve into, it's all the more galling. Not only that we didn't sign them, but the players who we did actually sign instead of them. The Andy Melville example there you gave, Chris, was a rare example. I think it was ending up with somebody better than that we actually gone for. Kevin Phillips and David Connolly is another one that falls firmly into that category. If I was going to pick somebody who we were so heavily linked with, and I really wish would sign because he would have been a brilliant player for us, and it might be a slightly boring one, but Leighton Baines. Leighton Baines was so close to joining Roy Keane's side from Wigan, wasn't he? We had talks with him, it was all apparently done, then Everton came in the last moment. I think it was David Moyes, typically doing something to sabotage Sunderland, which he's made a bloody career out of. But Leighton Baines could have been a superb player for us for a number of years. And the left back we got in instead of him, if I'm correct, you remember who it was?
Ian Hart, maybe?
Ian Hart. Cowie, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a great shout.
Well,
Weren't we also keen to get David Nugent? Was he Wigan or was he somebody else?
He was at Preston. That was a very lucky escape, wasn't it?
yeah.
For
But
us, it turned out.
wasn't a story he told about someone waving to him in a car park and then saying he'll give you a ring, and he sent him a message a second later. Was that not Matty Taylor?
Not Taylor, yeah.
Yeah. So he was a left-sided.
Well, he played a bit further forward, didn't he?
Yeah.
Because remember, he scored that goal for Portsmouth when Kelvin Davis went for a walkabout.
yeah.
Didn't Robbie Savage have something where it fell down because of a phone call?
Yeah, that
What
was his
voicemail message,
yeah.
wasn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, was his voicemail inappropriate and Roy Keane just thought, I don't fancy you anymore? Was it something like that?
It was. I'm not going to do it, but it was something like that.
It was
a Budweiser advert or something, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was the "What's Up" Budweiser thing.
So what was the Matty Taylor phone story then? What happened there?
That was when basically he said to Roy Keane, he said, look, there's us and Bolton in for me. And he went, well, and like Roy Keane was like, well, it's Bolton and it's Sunderland. So what really are you thinking about? And Matty Taylor was like, and they shook hands, and he was like, no, he says, I'll just I need to think about it. I need to speak to a few people, but thanks very much. And I says, I'll make my decision in a couple of days or whatever. And he says he saw him walk to his car, he's waving to him. Matty Taylor's window open, waved back. And he said, as he's waving, he says, Roy Keane's phone goes. Says it's Matty Taylor sending a message saying, I'm signing for Bolton. As he's driving out the car park.
No, I didn't. The barrier must have gone up to let him exit the car park before he pressed send. I think he might not have risked it otherwise.
Yeah.
But
There was another one, and I can't remember the name of it, but someone who came into Keane's office and like put his feet on the desk or something like that. And Roy Keane was just like, right, no, not signing you.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I ever knew who that one was, but yeah, I think he stuffed himself in the first minute, I think.
But it's interesting, isn't it? Because, I think, was it something recently in a talking or a gathering that they were talking about the club's current transfer activity? And apparently there's been so many players we haven't signed because when they've had talks either on video call or in person, either the player's body language hasn't been right or they haven't come across well. And it's like, nah, that character's not for us. And if you look back at those examples I was talking about with Roy Keane, or some of them anyway, it's like character, isn't it? Remember, he's with Robbie Savage's message. He just listened. He goes, "Nah, I'm not having that."
Yeah.
And just that deal was off.
Yeah. Well, I know you've written recently, Martin, and on this day about Brian Mooney's transfer. And,
Yes.
And Dennis Smith writes in his book that he felt he was absolutely shafted by, I want to say, John McGrath. Was it John McGrath?
Yes.
The Preston manager, where he was like, he asked John McGrath, he was saying, is he fit and all this sort of stuff. And he was, of course, yeah, really fit. He's really sharp, and he came with like multiple injuries, and he's like half fit, and he couldn't play 90 minutes and all this sort of stuff. So he said he was completely shafted by him, and he said he went to a fans talking where he said, raise your hands if you think Brian Mooney was a bad signing, and everyone in the room raised their hands, including Dennis Smith.
That's a lesson how to get the best out of your players, isn't it? Because Brian Mooney was still very much on Sunderland's books at the time. So there you go. We will take a very short break at that point, and when we come back, we're going to delve into the first very famous name who almost became a Sunderland player. We'll be back after a couple of ads. Welcome back to How Are the podcast, and we've got an episode of Roker. I nearly said on this week. Roker Rewind for you today. It's almost same but different, isn't it? And the first name that we're going to delve into, who nearly signed for Sunderland but didn't quite get there, is a player who Andrew Len Ashurst had managed previously. So we're going back to the 80s for this one, aren't we? and it's a player Len Ashurst had managed. He was very, very fond of, and I think this player was very fond of him and was desperate to come and join him at Roker Park. And for one reason or another, mainly Tom Cowie, I think, when you read into it, it just never happened, did it?
Yeah, I mean, you say for one reason or another, it was Tom Cowie, from what we're led to believe. This wasn't like a multifaceted deal where there was lots of issues to iron out. It was basically Tom Cowie put a block to it. John Aldridge, who went on to become one of the most prolific strikers in the first division. It's really important that you said there that it was during Len Ashurst's time as manager, because I don't think John Aldridge particularly wanted to play for Sunderland, but he was desperate to play for Len Ashurst, his former manager. They'd been together at Newport County, I want to say.
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah. And you see this a lot. You see players who really have a connection with certain managers, and John Aldridge seemingly was on the verge of signing for Oxford United, but he asked, or I don't know if his dad did this just off his own back or whatever, but the family contacted Sunderland and said, listen, John's about to move, but if you match the offer, he'd come to Roker. There was no negotiations. It was a case of, listen, if he can come to Sunderland and play for Len Ashurst, he'll do it. The problem is, Oxford have done all the legwork. Oxford are ready to hit go on this deal and make it happen. Len Ashurst's over the moon. He knows John Aldridge's qualities. He thinks he can make a difference to the team. But he approaches Tom Cowie, and whilst Tom Cowie says, yes, you can have the money, yes, you can spend it, I think he says something like, yes, but we have to pay in installments, or you have to raise some of the funds by selling another player. Basically, Oxford didn't have any conditions like that. Oxford at the time were owned by Robert Maxwell, who was very much a kind of like, if I want something, I'll make it happen. And Sunderland couldn't do it. Oxford were able to pay the cash up front and get the deal done straight away. And Len Ashurst has to go and watch John Aldridge do well there, and then go to Liverpool and become one of the hottest prospects in the country. So yeah, there was a one where if it was only if we had, I don't even think it was big money, Martin, but if we had a few grand to spend, we could have had one of the most dangerous strikers going. And he never let us forget it, because years later, John Aldridge thought, I'm so gutted I never went to Sunderland. I'm going to get a player sent off and replace him with a substitute, and that'll show them for turning me down.
Yeah, teach him, won't it? No, it was £75,000 that Newport has agreed with Oxford, and this is a player who, while he's scored a lot of goals, he scored 69 goals in 170 odd games for Newport. He's 25 or so at the time, so it's not as if he's a young player. And you don't really get those players being given a chance these days. You don't often see players coming from the 4th division or 3rd division and going straight to the top flight at that sort of age. You kind of either have to get there earlier, or you'll never really get there at all. But as you say, this was approaching transfer deadline day, so there wasn't many days left before the deadline hit. This was when we had a March transfer deadline, and you could make transfers all season round until the March deadline, which was the 3rd Thursday in March. And then it was it for the rest of the season. Ashurst said he would have recently arrived at Sunderland, I think, wouldn't he, at that point? And he was trying to really stamp his authority, stamp his own mark on the team. And yeah, this deal had been agreed with Maxwell, who'd obviously offered John Aldridge a decent pension as well as everything else. And Tom Cowie had said that the fee for Aldridge had to be paid in installments to Newport. We couldn't afford the 75 grand. And Ashurst would have to sell somebody before the transfer deadline, bring some money in. Aldridge had been given a 1 hour deadline, I think, by by Robert Maxwell say either sign or the deal's off the table. So this phone call was happening frantically, saying you need to let us know within the hour if you can do this deal. And obviously it did not come off. But Chris Aldridge went on to be a fantastic player for Liverpool, and obviously at Tranmere as well. You know, we all saw him play and score goals against us. And yes, it's certainly one of those what could have been, because if he'd arrived, you stay up next season potentially, and the whole world looks a little bit different.
Yeah, it's all about timing, isn't it? It's a strange thing when you were talking about it, because I was just thinking, the way that season went with Alan Durban getting the boot and then Len Ashurst coming in. I think Len Ashurst's first game was right at the beginning of March. So he's already coming up to the end of that transfer window. And you can imagine, though, because with Alan Durban being sacked and it was the team that Durban had built, you can imagine that the remit from Tom Cowie at the time to Ashurst was, right, you've got the rest of the season to keep us up. And you're doing it with this squad. And then suddenly he gets a phone call. His old mate, John Aldridge, is going to be on the move. And he's possibly thinking, you could imagine he's thinking at the time, right, when I get sorted in the summer, keep us up. Because if you look at the list of players that left, Paul Bracewell left. That was a big one for me. $250,000 to Everton. But Ian Atkins, I think Lee Chapman was one of them, Pop Robson. There's a whole list of players who left from that Alan Durban team. So he's probably thinking, right, John Aldridge is top of my list in the summer, and it just comes along too early. Oxford United just make their move towards the end of that season, and he played. And you remember Oxford United are in the 3rd division at this point, so it's not like Oxford United are flying.
No.
We're in the top flight,
Yeah.
and we haven't got enough money yet. Maxwell, and I'm sure he threw in a lifetime subscription to the Daily Mirror for John Aldridge as well. In all of that, he's probably still getting them now. But yeah, so it's just all about timing. That you can imagine if that deal hadn't gone through in the summer, going into the next season, John Aldridge might have been a Sunderland player, because it took him 2 more years to get to the top flight. Like, he didn't play in the top flight until 85, 86. Another full season after that, of course, because they went up that season, played in the 2nd division, and then another season where he could have jumped straight to the top flight with us. And of course, 75,000, when you say that fee, same fee we ended up paying for Howard Gale in the summer. So I'm sure that money was earmarked for signing John Aldridge. But yeah, I mean, you could say, but the thing is that Tom Cowie's thinking, we might be a 2nd division club. We might be completely, in a big mess next season, and I'm not sure how I was going to do. And look, it was clear Len Ashurst, with the players he sold, wanted to completely rebuild the squad. I mean, selling Paul Bracewell, because Paul Bracewell said, he said, like, at the time he would have quite happily stayed, but Everton came in and they were a big club, and because at the time the money was. There was a difference, but it wasn't like life-changing sums of money like it is now if you sign for one of the big clubs. So, yeah, it's just all about timing. And this was all about Robert Maxwell doing his thing at Oxford and splashing the cash from the 3rd division. And, what might have been. I mean, yeah, and the other thing is, Gary Rowell's just left as well. So he would have replaced that big figure up front as being our new talisman up front, but yeah, you never know. Who knows what would have been?
No, well, it was Robert Maxwell doing his thing at Oxford and Tom Cowie doing his thing at Sunderland, that one, wasn't it? The next one that we have, and Chris, you mentioned Ariel Ortega a little while ago, was a name that got linked with Sunderland, somewhat tenuously, I think, but you never know. It was Paul Scholes as well, was the other one, wasn't it, that was linked during that summer, which, again, I don't know how much credibility that had, but I think Peter Reid did inquire about him.
It got mentioned on Premier Passions, so
That's
there
right.
must have been some substance to it.
That's right. Now, Chris, Ariel Ortega wasn't the first Argentinian number 10 to be linked with Sunderland, but also to really, there was potential, as it turns out. There was a lot of potential for this to happen. And we're going back to 1977 for this one. and there's a certain Mr. Diego Maradona who could have been strutting his stuff at Roker, dancing the weekends away in Sunderland. Well, things have turned out differently.
Yeah, well, you never know. Sunderland, compared to the, wherever he moved, Sunderland might have kept him on the straight and narrow. He might have, he might have just been on the McEwen's best scotch or whatever, rather than whatever else he was having throughout his career. But this is a bizarre one, because obviously we're talking about the genius, possibly one of the best players to ever walk the planet, which is of course Diego Maradona. And it is an odd one, because when you look back, I live in Sheffield, and they always seem to have the claim that it was them who first spotted Maradona and made offers, and they were the ones who were after him and brought him across to England and had some words with him and all this sort of stuff. But I've never looked into it too much. I've always just kind of believed that. Now, through your tireless digging, Martin, you found some kind of great quotes and things from Maradona's biographer, who worked on his book Touched by God, which says actually the first offer was from Sunderland in 1977, and that we went across. But it was the time, and I think we might have talked about. I'm sure we did it on this week. It was the time that Spurs were hunting about in looking at Argentinian players, and I think it was like, football comes in like fashion. It comes in cycles, and people start looking in similar places for players. And yeah, that in the late 70s, he was only 17-year-old, and I mean the quote is, like you've pulled out, Martin: "If they don't sell me to Sunderland, I'm retiring." Now,
I think we should get T-shirts with that on, shouldn't we?
I mean, it's incredible though that I'm sure after this, when he was 17, he probably said he was retiring every year until he actually retired, didn't he? After this, and then he actually retired, and then he came back, and then he said he was retiring again. So, I take this, tongue in cheek. That's considering how many times he said it. I'm not sure how serious he was, and especially that he didn't go to Sunderland and he didn't retire when he was 17 years old. So I think that tells you a lot as well. But yeah, I mean, God, Maradona at that time, late 70s in Sunderland, would he have settled? Would he have, how would he have gone for fish and chips and all this sort of stuff? Would he have, and it's always, you talk about, Gazza always talks about if he went to Manchester United instead of Spurs at that point, he said, would everything have been all right, or would he have still been exactly the same? With Maradona, who knows? But I think with how much of a genius he was, if he'd come with that sort of talent and he kind of did what he did, he wouldn't have lasted very long at Sunderland, would he? At that time, like if he played a few games, of course, because we went and got Marangoni. He was the Argentinian we brought in, but if you had to put money on it, would you have said it would have lasted that long, one way or another?
Hey, who knows? He could have a statue outside the Stadium of Light now if things had worked out, couldn't he? But Andrew,
for just he's off the field, aren't they?
I will leave that up to you to decide. Andrew, it somewhat makes sense in terms of things that were happening at Sunderland and within football at the time. As Chris said, Ozzy Ardiles and Ricky Villiers had gone to Spurs and were playing there. A couple of years later, we had Oscar Arce, the Argentinian scout, which I'm faithfully told by my Argentinian colleagues that is how it's pronounced. Where he was an Argentinian scout who brought over a few players to have trials at Sunderland. So we were obviously trying to explore that market. The South American market was seen as a good one for English clubs to look at. As Chris said, we obviously did sign Marangoni after that a year or two later. So it's plausible that this is all true. And as Chris said, that we've dug out some things that the biographer of Maradona, a chap called Daniel Arucci, or Arucci, however you want to say that one. He's talked about how close Maradona came to joining Sunderland. He said the first offer that came in for Maradona as a 17-year-old was from Sunderland, and Maradona wanted to come. As Chris said, there was threat to retirement, which obviously did not come to fruition. But he was at Argentinos Juniors, who obviously we signed Julio Walker and Nicolas Medina from a couple of decades later. But it's plausible that this could have happened, isn't it?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, you're right in that signing players from abroad in that era had suddenly become en vogue. Chris touched on earlier about Maradona and people from Sheffield saying, we saw him first. But they signed Alex Sabella for Bramall Lane, didn't they? Sheffield United. I don't know if it was a case of employment law was changing or just the world was becoming smaller or maybe better value could be found abroad. But yeah, clubs were looking to bring in foreign imports, some of whom were the most exciting footballers on the planet. It's interesting, the timeline to me, because in 77, when we're linked with Maradona, we're not necessarily a big club, but depending on the timing of it, it might have. I don't know if it was before or after we got relegated, thanks to Jimmy Hill's intervention at Coventry. But you're right in that after that, Ken Knighton takes over, and he spends ages working with Mr. Arse and bringing in Marangoni eventually. So different people at the club, different managers, different regimes, and yet they all still want to bring in a player from abroad. So it must have been a real thing that clubs had. It wasn't just certain individuals. It seemed that everybody was on board with this idea. And it's, as Chris says, had Maradona come here, would it have worked out? Because Marangoni was a bit of a flop at Sunderland. But once he left England, once he'd gone back to South America, I'm sure he won a load of honours, and I think he was named Player of the Year in South America, which kind of backs up Chris's point that maybe even if we had brought Maradona along, he might not have settled. Maybe the English game wouldn't have suited him, and the rest of the Sunderland team wouldn't have been on the same wavelength. But I do like that idea of, Maradona's statue, rather than being outside one of the grounds, it was on Keele Square outside the site of Annabelle's or something. You know, Diego Maradona was thrown down these stairs on the 12th of December, 1977 or something. But his footwork was so good that he landed on his feet and just walked.
Carried on.
Yeah, just walked home or something.
He caught his bottle of beer on his foot or something like that.
Yeah.
And apparently the reason this deal did not happen was because of the Argentinian government. They're obviously under a military dictatorship. Relationships between England and Argentina weren't the best, and obviously that's rolled out over the next few years, didn't it? But apparently the militia, the military dictatorship, said, absolutely not, we're not selling any players like that. He was put on a list of people who weren't allowed to leave, and that was that.
We thought, if we think nowadays that dealing with agents is tough, imagine I'm going to pick up the phone like the militia saying, you don't mind us signing one of your players, do you?
Talk to her, Visa. She'll sort it out.
Like, even though, because your first mind goes, oh, well, he's 17. It was a year after he made his debut. He was only 16 when he made his debut in Argentina. And you go, oh, actually, late 70s England. Oh, he's going to get kicked all over. But I tell you what, I bet coming from the Argentinian leagues, that was the least of his problems, wasn't it? He probably would have thought it was nothing compared to that.
And when you see some of the treatment he got in Spain when he actually went to Barcelona.
Well, there's a famous one when he was at Napoli, isn't it? Where it showed, there's a famous game, I think, when he just got absolutely smashed all over the place when he was at Napoli. So I don't think that would have been any bother for him. Playing against these old, slow English centre-halves and things, he would have had them on toast.
I'm sure Graham Souness would have sent him into the Clocksand paddock.
Yeah, and then complained that he was fouled.
Do you think if he'd come to England and been kicked up a height by Peter Reid or Terry Butcher or Terry Fenwick, he would never have gone and scored that wonder goal against England in '86?
Hey,
you know, Could have changed the whole course of English football history.
Yeah. He might have had a soft spot for us and not put his hand up in '86.
This is true.
Or all the Sunderland fans could have been supporting Argentina in the World Cup semi-final a few weeks ago.
Yeah, who knows how everything would have transpired there. I did see something interesting with them. It was obviously talking about VAR ruling out goals that had been scored, and they were talking about the Egypt one that Egypt scored against Argentina that got pulled back and disallowed, and said if Maradona's handball goal would have got disallowed for VAR, but in the build-up to his wonder goal that he scored, there's actually a foul by Argentina on an English player that the referee just let go. When you look at it, it was an absolute stonewall foul. So that one would have been disallowed by VAR as well. So
Well,
there you go.
you reckon? If you compare it
Well-
to the most recent World Cup, that's not how it went.
Sorry.
They ignored it.
I'll rephrase. Should have been disallowed by
Yeah,
VAR.
okay.
Never mind, would have been. Shoulda, woulda, coulda. We will take another short break there and we'll be back after a couple of ads. Welcome back to However the podcast, and you're joining us for a look at some of the players who could have signed for Sunderland, but ultimately didn't. But we kind of really wish that they did. We've already covered Diego Maradona and John Aldridge, and we're going up to a different type of player now. Andrew, we're going to go back to the late 90s. Peter Reid's in charge of Sunderland, looking for a replacement for Niall Quinn. And there's a young fella who is Swedish. He's playing for Ajax, and he catches Peter Reid's eye, apparently, doesn't he?
Well, he didn't just catch Peter Reid's eye, he caught the eye of our recruitment team when we were in the championship as well. So,
Actually, maybe that explains it. Maybe they just picked up an old bit of paper. Or maybe
yeah.
somebody has forgotten to delete the notes off the bottom of the last scouting report they'd done.
Yeah, Tom Cowie refused to buy new paper. So Sunderland managers ever since just had to like recycle old managers' notebooks. And somehow Peter Reid's scouting notes on Zlatan Ibrahimovic ended up being used in later years as well. Zlatan Ibrahimovic was, I think he was a bit further down the line than somebody like Maradona, in that by the stage Sunderland had seen him, he was at Ajax and he was making a name as a senior player. Peter Reid had spotted him, or perhaps one of Peter Reid's scouts had spotted him, if we're being truthful. But he liked the look of him, he fancied him, and thought he had a serious chance of bringing Ibrahimovic to Sunderland. He was at Ajax at the time, and during this era, Sunderland had a good relationship with that club, which Reid hoped would help kind of like oil the wheels and smooth things along and make things move in the right direction. But basically, again, money was the issue. We made a bid of £6 million, which was significant for us at the time, but Ibrahimovic was clearly destined to be one of the best players in the world. And I think even then, 6 million wasn't enough for a player of that standard. He didn't come to Sunderland, and we saw what he became. It's laughable now to think we only bid 6 million for him, but probably at the time, if you picked up the Echo and read that Sunderland had made a £6 million bid for a player who was a prospect, people might have gone the other way and thought, what's he doing? Why is he willing to spend that much money? So hindsight's a wonderful thing, and had we known just how good Ibrahimovic was gonna be, Sunderland might have scraped together a little bit more money. But yeah, yet again, as with all of these stories, it's a case of what might have been.
He could have ended up just being another Stefano Santini, Chris, if we had brought him in as a young prospect, couldn't he? But it's interesting because Peter Reid said he tried to get Zlatan. So this is an interview in the Sun that I found. He said he tried to get Zlatan while he was at Malmo. So he must be talking when he was 17 or 18 year old at this point. because Reid also says we were at Roker Park at the time.
Yeah,
When
I
you
was
look
looking
at
at that.
when you look at the ages he was, I think he's probably got slightly mixed up unless he really spotted him when he's 16-year-old. 'Cause I don't think that quite marries up. But he's obviously tried to get him when he's in Malmo and he went to Ajax at that point. And then he must have only been at Ajax for a season when Reid's tried to get him in again to replace Niall Quinn. And apparently there was some meetings and all this sort of stuff, but it never actually went as far as having talks. But apparently we put money down and they wanted a bit more and all that sort of stuff. But again, Peter Reid's bringing in Zlatan to replace Niall Quinn, partnering Kevin Phillips. We might never have seen Howard Wilkinson if that had come off, might we?
Yeah, well, again, another one that might have extended the Peter Reid years. I was doing exactly the same thing as you. I was trying to work out the timelines on Peter Reid's comments saying he wanted him at Roker, because then you read up and Ibrahimovic signed his first contract with Malmo in 1996, which was the start of the last season, if I've got my dates correct. And then he said he didn't really get a chance until 1999 in the first team at Malmo. Yeah, I'm trying to work out that, unless he's confusing him with John Dahl Thomason walking around the Charlie Early Centre.
Well, that's true, yeah.
Because it goes on Premier Passions. We had the footage of that as he walked around the training ground.
And
so,
don't forget Ronan Haratzi, which we haven't mentioned. But
yes, the bionic man, wasn't he? He was more metal than man, apparently. Because of those scans. But yeah, so it's a really interesting one like that. Possibly, you can imagine that he was on a list somewhere, they were tracking him and they saw this good player at Malmo. I mean, the thing is, I did see that while he was at Malmo, when he came through, and it was clear that, everyone in Europe thought he was a good player, that apparently Arsene Wenger tried to get him to join Arsenal, but they'd offered him a trial. And he said later on, Arsene Wenger asked me to have a trial with Arsenal when I was 17. I turned it down. Zlatan doesn't do auditions. So, I mean, when you listen to that, or that, this is a guy who's got that much confidence in his ability and knows where he's going. And again, the comments that you pulled out, Martin, when he said, when he was at Ajax and we were trying to get him in, he said we offered 6 million, which was decent dough, but they wanted more. And then he said, I saw him walk past and he smiled, but no conversation. You just wonder if Ibrahimovic thought, yeah, all these clubs want us, but I know I'm not going to sign for them. I'm waiting for that big one. And of course it was Juventus that ended up coming in. But I think he's one of these players, and you compare him to maybe the Bellinghams when you hear about that, where the Bellinghams were like, this is our pathway, we know where we're going, we know how high our next move is. And there was probably nobody telling them, no team around him, but he probably knew, look, I know how good I am, I know where I'm going. And unfortunately, Sunderland wasn't it. It wasn't as much as Peter Reid wanted him. I think even if Peter Reid had chucked twice as much money at Ajax and twice as much money at him as wages, he still wouldn't have come. I think it's nice that Peter Reid was clearly trying to get good players in at Sunderland. It's nice to have that thought. But Ibrahimovic was never signing for Sunderland. And of course, we need to really talk about very quickly when we talk about what might have been sliding doors, because of course it was Tor Andre Flo, wasn't it?
Do we have to?
Who came in? Well, again, one of the stories, and we all know what happened with Tor Andre Flo. The bizarre thing is, if you look at Tor Andre Flo's stats at Rangers the season before, it wasn't too bad. He had a decent season the year before at Rangers. But you wonder again how fit he was when he came, because I know Bob Murray was good mates with Dave Murray, I think, at Rangers. They were good mates and they fell out over the Tor Andre Flo deal, because he claimed that not on any official level, I think it was all moral, that he said Dave Murray basically did him over on the Tor Andre Flo deal. And Dave Murray said so years later, but was like, well, it's business. Yes, okay, we're friends, but it was business as well. And he said, yeah, I know I did you over. But I don't know what that was about, because you can't really say it was purely based at talent, because look, he had some good years at Chelsea and decent stats at Rangers. So you do wonder whether it was that fitness side and picking up injuries and niggles, or maybe whatever it was. But yeah, so the Rangers hierarchy knew that they did us over on the floor, Dale.
Now, he's 29-year-old when he arrived at Sunderland, and having only put 6 million in for Zlatan, we wasted 8.2 million on Torre Andre Flo. So there you go, sliding doors moments indeed. And again, can you imagine if Zlatan had arrived that summer, Reid doesn't lose his job. Who knows what happens after that? We don't go down.
Does though? There's every chance that Reid takes a dislike to him, like he did with a lot of foreign imports. But there's also every chance that Zlatan Ibrahimovic looks at the likes of Peter Reid and Bobby Saxton, like with their eyes bulging and their veins popping out the side of their neck, screaming and shouting, and just thinks, nah.
Kung Fu kicks one.
Yeah, Zlatan doesn't do this. Zlatan doesn't get being shouted at by some Scouse person whose accent I can't understand, and just gets up and wanders off, hails a cab from the Charlie Hurley Centre, and then is never seen again.
Yeah, well, just like Thomas Helmer, he might have played Ibrahimovic left midfield or something like that. And he was like, Zlatan doesn't play left midfield. And that was it.
Oh, well, you ruined my there we go. Bobby Saxton's hospitalised for receiving a flying kick to the head, and he tries to tell Zlatan how to finish. Right, our last one that we've got, gents. This is a defender in the Roy Keane era. We spoke about Roy Keane and some of his transfers earlier in this pod, didn't we? And this one, Chris, is ultimately one of Italy's most famous ever defenders. He turns out to be, but back in the time, he was a relatively young lad. Sunderland had just gone up, and we were trying to build a team for the Premier League. And this is a interesting one because apparently it was all but done and dusted, and it was just a financial thing that scuppered it, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Chiellini, and when you see him, when you've seen him play over the years, you just think I know he's world class, but just the type of player, you just think he's a Sunderland player.
Yeah.
He's like Ibrahimovic. I'm quite comfortable. I can see the anguish on your face that you were desperate to see him in a red and white stitch. In my mind, Ibrahimovic is just this enigma that might not have worked at Sunderland. I don't know why, because obviously you probably would have, because he's world class. But Chiellini's is the player where we would have celebrated these headers as much as celebrated people's goals. He would have been like that. He would have been that sort of legend. But yeah, and it was one of those, again, timing wise, that we were in for him before. I mean, he signed for Juventus, but he was one of these players, and it happens in Italy quite a lot, where you see clubs like Juventus and Inter Milan, all of the top clubs there, they'll buy these players, but with a bit of a hope. So they might buy them for 3, 4, 5 million euros, but it'll almost be to sell them maybe for a bit more. And it happens quite a lot in Italy. And I think Chelsea have got on that bandwagon a little bit. But at the time, he hadn't really been earmarked as being, right, well, he's going to be a star. And again, some of the quotes you pulled out, Martin, from our scout, Mick Brown at the time, that he basically said, we have to get him. And there was clearly something in it, because I don't know if you two have watched it, but I think it was a couple of years ago, they did an overlap on tour in Italy, and they all did a big interview with Chiellini in a restaurant. I think it was his restaurant, actually.
Yeah.
And they were basically, him and Roy Keane were having a bit of banter, because Roy Keane said, well, yeah, I nearly signed you. And Chiellini was going, yeah. No, he says, I was ready to sign. I was going to sign. And he said, but they were both sitting there going, yeah, I don't know why it didn't happen. I mean, it's amazing, isn't it? The two main people who you would think at the top on either side, the manager who wants them and the player who wants to join, have no clue how it didn't happen. You just think, how many steps is there in between that people don't know about, that people need to talk to each other, that these things don't happen? Because he's probably clearly one of the best defenders over the last 20 odd years, across Europe, and he would have been brilliant for us, even if he'd moved on. Even he was one of these players. If he'd spent 2 years with us and moved on, we'd still be talking about him in a red and white strip.
Yeah.
I mean, we're still talking about Johnny Evans, never mind. And Johnny Evans was brilliant, but we would have been talking about Chiellini in a Sunderland strip, and he would have been just down as one of the best Sunderland defenders, even if it was a year and we made twice as much money, whatever. But this one, actually, when you go down them, the Aldridge one, Timon, the other ones, Maradona, pie in the sky, Ibrahimovic, again, a bit pie in the sky, I think, from my point of view. This is the one out of the four that we're talking about, the one that got away, because it was close and he was brilliant. And again, it's funny, after this, I'm going to go back and listen to that conversation and kind of just see if I can pick some stuff up, because I'm doing it from memory. But yeah, Keane was clearly gutted he didn't come. But Chiellini was, as soon as Keane brought it up, he was like, yeah. I remember that. And he said, yeah, I was going to play. He says, I was kind of going to. And he said as well, because he said that when he was a young player, his hero was Roy Keane. And he said he remembered that in Italy, everyone was talking about that performance against Juventus in that semi-final. And he said he wanted to play for Roy Keane. And he brought out this. I think he actually came out in a Manchester United strip with Keane on the back that he had and stuff like that. So he was like, I wanted to sign for you. I wanted to play for you. Obviously, wasn't his, Sunderland weren't his boyhood club or anything like that. It was Roy Keane, like it was with a ton of other players. So this is the one that bugs me out of the list we've got, because this one could have happened.
And Andrew, as Chris has sort of alluded to there, this one is ultra plausible in terms of timelines as well. So you're looking at a player here who, as we've said, Juventus had signed maybe 3 or 4 years before, but then they sent him out on loan. At the same time, Juventus had all this scandal, didn't they? They got demoted, had to work their way back up the leagues. So the season before, when we got promoted under Roy Keane to the top flight, Chiellini was getting promoted from Serie B back up to Serie A with Juventus. So this isn't a player who's spent the last 3 or 4 years playing in the top flight of Italian football. He's been playing in the lower leagues, got Juventus back up, helped Juventus get back up. I think Juve had paid 5 or 6 million euros for him a few years earlier. Obviously, finances were a key part of why they got into a bit of trouble. So, they're potentially quite keen to recoup some money and all that sort of stuff. And we put 8 million down, being agreed with Juventus that we'd get this player for 8 million. It's another one of those, and apparently it was for the sake of a couple of $100,000, couldn't be agreed between the club or the agent or whoever it was. But that's one that somebody will be looking back on going, God, I wish I'd just pressed the button on that one.
It's a proper sickener. And Chris's story there about when Keane and Chiellini met up, that just kind of like puts salt in the wounds. It's so frustrating, because when you look at the timelines and where Sunderland were at the time and where Chiellini was at the time in his career, it all makes perfect sense. It seems as if it was a deal that would have suited everybody. And as Chris pointed out, maybe the other names, there might have been an element of wishful thinking in them, but this one felt right. And I can't add anything to what Chris said, because he's spot on. Chiellini would have been perfect for Sunderland. He's the type of player I love seeing the most as well. I've always preferred a proper defender. That's just the type of footballer I like watching. So I would have loved him, and it's so upsetting to realise how close we were. And like you say, it was for the sake of a couple of $100,000, and it perhaps wasn't even the money. It might have just been something about when it was paid, or was it a bonus clause or something like that. So for such an ideal move to not happen because of such a relatively minor thing, it's It's so galling. The only thing I try and tell myself is, if he'd come to Sunderland, it might not have worked out. Because weren't we linked with Virgil van Dijk? And he then went on to become the best defender in the Premier League.
Yeah.
If he'd come to Sunderland, he would have been relegated within a couple of years and just spent the rest of his career dotting around.
You keep telling yourself this because Chiellini would have worked at Sunderland.
I know. I know it would really, Chris.
Absolutely.
As would Virgil van Dijk, who was another one we could have included in this list.
Well, as well, and he did that on the back of years at Southampton, which at the time we might have been a similar.
Was it Celtic? Was it before he went to Southampton?
It was Celtic then Southampton, wasn't it?
I think he went to Southampton instead of us. So you're right in that his Southampton part of his career would have been very different had it been at Sunderland. Chris, you're dead right. I don't know who I'm trying to kid. Laney was the most Sunderland
player, never to play for Sunderland.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, there's two things in this that because like Martin, you were talking about the way the deals went in Italy with Chiellini, that there was some part ownership, co-ownership, which is all a bit weird in Italy. One thing is you don't know where, if somebody said, right, we want an extra 200,000, was it maybe somewhere where they weren't really happy about the money going in that deal? It was maybe something, because all that co-ownership is all a bit weird and all that sort of stuff. The other thing I will say about not getting him, you look at the first couple of years of Roy Keane's management, he didn't really nail down that one big centre half.
No.
Like if you looked, I mean, we've got Stan Varga in the first season, I think, and then he goes on, and we've got McShane, and then he goes on, and then it's a bit further down when he gets the likes of Ferdinand and people like that. But he never really gets that centre half, and he gets the keeper, he gets some spends plenty in the forward positions, fullbacks as well. Spend quite a bit on fullbacks, but he didn't really nail down that top class centre half, and maybe that was part of the difference in those. And you just think, and again, if Chiellini's there and he's playing for his hero in Roy Keane, maybe he kind of sticks around a bit longer than maybe he would have with other clubs and things like that. But yeah, it's the one that got away out of these four, because it's the one position King really struggled with, I think, to nail down that big signing.
It is. And the interesting thing with this one as well is that, if I have got my timings correct, Chiellini did play at the Stadium of Light before this season kicked off, because we played Juventus in the 10th anniversary of the Stadium of Light game.
Yeah.
So he was there. So that adds to the plausibility of talks and all that sort of stuff going on, which obviously has been confirmed.
That was the Spider-Man game, wasn't it?
Yes. Long before Enzo Lefebvre.
Yes. When the ball disappeared down a gangway at the Stadium of Light, it bounced down and everyone went, "Whee!" because it disappeared down the gangway. And then out popped Spider-Man with the ball to an even bigger cheer.
Only at Sunderland could somebody say that was a Spider-Man game, and everybody know what you mean.
Yeah.
Chiellini's probably looking around the place thinking, "Oh, I might have had a lucky escape here. This lot are absolutely mad."
Or maybe the other way, go, God, these are brilliant. We're superheroes as ball boys. And anyway, it wasn't all bad with us missing out on him, because we obviously signed Paul McShane instead. So there you go. I was hoping this would be a bit of fun, but I've ended up quite depressed about what the season 18 years ago might have turned out like if we'd signed somebody. But never mind. That's all part of the fun, isn't it?
Well, exactly. And half of my life is spent daydreaming about Sunderland and what if this player had come, or more often than not, what if we hadn't signed a particular player? That would be an even more depressing pod. The transfer deals that
we wish hadn't happened. But we could do hours. That could be a whole new weekly or daily podcast, couldn't it? You know, there's
Well,
been a few.
the big one that we haven't mentioned in terms of being a saga was the Villa one.
Oh, of course.
That's
Oh,
true.
that's another absolute shocker.
Yeah, where it
Oh,
was,
man.
come and get me. I've always been on the fence how serious he was about that. If I'm completely honest, but that's
Oh.
probably a story for another day, I guess. But-
Instagram messages from a pub in London, wasn't he? And
yeah, and actually, well, this is the thing. I mean, look, we've talked about forward, but this list is endless. But there is a difference actually when we've been talking about these, because we've got the Amphilia one, Instagram. Darren Bent went on Facebook, was it, or Twitter, to
Darren
say he
Bent's
wanted
aye.
to make sure he went to Sunderland and
Yeah.
all that sort of stuff. So that there is a different way of doing things now and in the last kind of 10, 15 years to before that.
It certainly was. And if you're listening to this and you've got a player who you know we almost signed or we were heavily linked to and we haven't mentioned in this pod, please send us an email, SAFC@gmail.com. Because we might do another episode of this. It's been good fun looking at players who might have signed and living out our little fantasy worlds as we go along.
Well, Martin, I'm looking at the research you did for this. There's at least 3 names we haven't even mentioned. So yeah, yeah, you've already started the prep for that one.
Tune in for part 2 next
Yeah.
week.
I wish I hadn't mentioned Amphilia now, because everybody would have just replied with that name, wouldn't it?
Yeah, well, you need to make it tricky for people. It's all good. Excellent. I think we'll wrap it up there, chaps. It's been a great pleasure and a lot of good fun. So thank you very much, Andrew.
Lush. As always, I loved it. Thank you very much.
And thank you as always, Chris.
Yeah, brilliant as always, gents. Thank you very much.
I am frantically now trying to turn a picture of Dwight York in the 2008 Sunderland shirt into Chiellini. So hopefully that will make the podcast artwork when this goes out. And of course, we'll be back tomorrow with another episode of How We Are the Podcast. Until then, it is goodbye from us.